While the president may not always see eye to eye with his military leaders or even members of the rank and file, a lot of times those disagreements were over huge policy issues, matters of war and peace. But the story of retired Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher is very different. This is a case that the president has been personally involved in, despite the wishes of many currently serving in the military. Chief Gallagher served as the platoon leader of SEAL Team 7. It was during his final deployment to Mosul, Iraq in 2017 that his fellow SEALs say they witnessed behavior that caused them to speak out. Among other things, those SEALs accused Gallagher of, quote, stabbing a defenseless captive to death, of picking off a school-aged girl and an old man from a sniper's roost, and of indiscriminately spraying neighborhoods with rockets and machine gun fire. Gallagher eventually stood trial on charges that he murdered that captive, who was an ISIS prisoner. But he was later acquitted after a star witness in the case changed his testimony, later claiming that he himself had killed the prisoner. Gallagher was found guilty on a single charge for having posed for a photo with the corpse. President Trump has taken special interest in this case. After the Navy demoted Gallagher, the president reversed the demotion. When the Navy tried to remove Gallagher from the SEALs, the president once again stepped in, ordering the Pentagon to stand down. The Navy secretary was later fired for his handling of the case, while just last weekend, Gallagher, on the right, was seen meeting with the president at Mar-a-Lago. But tonight there is another development in this case. New York Times reporter David Phillips has exclusively obtained Navy interviews with the SEAL team members who accused Gallagher of misconduct in the first place. The Times has published many of those interviews with the investigators, and its TV series, The Weekly, has now published the video. What you are about to see shows them speaking on camera with investigators about their platoon leader, Eddie Gallagher. And a warning, what you are about to see and hear is disturbing.
In the summer of 2019, we get leaked a trove of Navy materials that includes thousands of documents, helmet cam footage, photos, text messages, and all these confidential interviews with the SEALs. Stuff that no one has ever seen before.
I heard more rumors and stuff like that of Eddie targeting civilians.
I saw Eddie take a shot at probably a 12-year-old kid.
What was Eddie's, I know he's a chief, what was his official position? I mean,
he was the platoon chief.
Okay.
This massive leak gives us insight into a very secretive brotherhood of commandos that otherwise we would never get to see.
The guy got crazier and crazier.
You can tell he was perfectly okay with killing anybody.
I see Eddie laying over him with a knife.
This is a case where some SEALs who are not supposed to take things outside the family turned in their own chief.
The guy was toxic.
We can't let this continue.
You know, there are these guys who believe in doing good and had the courage to act. It's just that things didn't turn out how they thought.
There were civilians everywhere.
We have a problem.
He's a psychopath.
Hey!
Guy's freaking evil, man.
Gallagher has long proclaimed his innocence. Gallagher's lawyer has accused those platoon members of having personal animosity with his client. He says he plans to file a lawsuit against The Weekly and the reporter behind that story. NBC News has not spoken with any of the individual SEALs shown in those taped interviews, but the New York Times has reached out to them, and they all declined to comment. Joining us now, Dave Phillips, national correspondent for the New York Times, who's been doing groundbreaking reporting on the story since it first broke. Dave, thank you for being with us tonight. Dave is featured in this week's episode of The Weekly, where you can see those newly published witness interviews. Dave, so much of this story has been about Eddie Gallagher, but one of the remarkable things that you see in those videos is just how many members of this SEAL team came forward. Now Gallagher has been exonerated by the Trump administration. What does that mean for people like that serving in the armed forces or in the special operations units?
Well, I think that's an open question. Certainly a lot of the SEALs who did come forward and testify fear retribution. Some of them are out of the Navy now, some of them are not. But certainly there's been threats of violence and other kinds of intimidation. But I think your earlier point is really something to focus on. What these platoon members accused their chief of is very serious and very grim, and it's a terrible story. But this is also a story of a number of remarkable young men who had to overcome like pretty serious cultural barriers and other obstacles to do the right thing, and they stuck with it, and they have continued to stick with it.
The interviews paint a startlingly consistent picture of the alleged inappropriate behavior by Eddie Gallagher, separate and apart from the stabbing of that prisoner at the center of this case. That pattern of behavior, why wasn't that sort of a bigger part of the case that was made against Gallagher, who was ultimately convicted of taking a photograph with the body of this prisoner?
Yeah, the story that the SEALs tell is that when they started witnessing these crimes that they say their chief was committing, they immediately turned him in. They say first they turned him into their low-level platoon commander, then they tried to tell their troop commander, and they worked their way up the chain of command, and no one did anything. And so by the time a real criminal investigation started, it was almost a year later, and a lot of the physical evidence was gone. In fact, when these guys came forward, they had no idea that later Navy investigators would find photos of the dead victim with the chief posing with him on the chief's phone. So they got lucky, but these guys came forward not because they knew that there was a smoking gun. They just felt that it was a necessary and right thing to do.
Gallagher's lawyer says he plans to sue you personally, saying that you left out important context in your reporting. Are you confident about what you included in your story?
Yeah, we go through a careful and collaborative process at the New York Times, and we stand by our reporting.
I mentioned some new polling that shows that Donald Trump is losing support with members of the armed services. As someone who reports on that area, give me a bit more context into this, because Donald Trump seems to feel that his support of and constant talk about troops should, put him in good stead with them.
I think that the most important thing to remember when talking about the armed forces is that it is full of millions of individuals, and so there you have to make a lot of distinctions. I mean, certainly Donald Trump still has a lot of approval amongst the demographics in the military that he does in the civilian world. But you can see a steady slip, and I think that's because the military is a very conservative, and I don't mean politically conservative, but culturally conservative institution. It likes to plan. It likes to go by regulations. And as we know, the president is much more of a wild card. And I think that they see that as a real liability at a lot of levels.
The president's involvement in this case has been a source of great controversy amongst people in the military, many of them who say there's a system and they like order, and the president sort of intervening in this thing in the middle of it has thrown that into disarray.
Right. Like I said, there is a range of opinions within the military. You wouldn't be hard-pressed to find SEALs that would say openly, hey, even if he did kill that guy, I'm okay with that. And you can easily find some that just find it absolutely abhorrent. But the general consensus, especially amongst the chain of command, the officers, the people who are trying to guide this institution, the senior people, they think that their inability to discipline someone who they see as totally unfit to serve is crazy.
Dave, thank you for your reporting. Dave Phillips of the New York Times, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.